It's 73-73 with a minute 46 left in the game. And I've got this feeling in my stomach of like, boy, I don't know if Kansas is going to pull this out. And that just made me kind of sit back and think, okay, over the last 18 plus years or so, if it's a tie game with a minute 46 left, Kansas wins 99.9% of those games, right? It's like, oh, automatic W. Don't even have to worry about it. Tie game, 146 left, easy W. No problem. No questions asked. You just had this feeling, right? A feeling of invulnerability, this invincibility of Kansas at Allen Fieldhouse late in a game like that. And you mentioned it. This year, you've had really all three of your losses at Allen Fieldhouse in conference play. Look at them. It's a tie game against West Virginia with 15 seconds left. You have the chaos that happens at the end of that game where you end up losing. Against Houston, you're up 6 with 16 seconds left. You find a way to lose. And now in this game, it's a tie game. You're down 3 with a minute 30 left. You have 2 possessions really that you have a chance to set up to try to make a basket to either tie the game or put yourself in position to make it a 1-point game and then eventually maybe win the game. And it's just an absolute train wreck.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
Paid all who enter beware this podcast. That's right, this is a paid podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty, and we're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. Be sure to check out their latest SBA loans as they help out local businesses in the Kansas City area. Be sure to check them out as they are proud partners and supporters of us here on the show and on KCSN as a whole as well. If you're listening on audio, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your audio. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can drop a comment at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. We've had some great content go up on our YouTube channel relating to the NFL Combine. I was there last week to check out all 4 of KU's players that are there. I had a chance to hear from all of them. You can check out those press conferences that they had at the NFL Combine, and had a chance to sit down with some NFL draft analysts to discuss where those players might end up going. So lots of NFL Combine content you can find on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. And of course, we're going to be talking more KU football coming up this spring, as we're recording this on Sunday morning. Sunday today, March 2nd, is the kickoff of KU spring practices. So you can look forward to tons of football content for spring coming up this spring, both on our YouTube channel, hearing from different players, coaches, and so on and so forth, as well as us talking about it as well. So look forward to that also. Unfortunately, though, today's show, we got to talk about what transpired at Allen Fieldhouse between Kansas and Texas Tech. KU had won 2 games in a row against lower quality opponents of the Big 12, certainly, in Oklahoma State and Colorado. Coming to this final 3-game stretch against 3 top 15 teams, Texas Tech, then Houston, and then Arizona. And this game, Kevin, it started out really well, actually. Kansas loses eventually 78-73. We'll dive into all of it. It started out really well for Kansas early in the game. Felt like they had that same level of energy. They had that connectedness. Things were looking pretty good. And then Texas Tech started just raining in threes. And pretty early on, Texas Tech kind of just revealed their game plan, which was jack up as many threes as possible. I think they had shot 22 threes at halftime. That they were looking to just absolutely rain it in from 3. And so throughout the game, it was kind of interesting to watch. Early in the game, Texas Tech gets really hot from 3. They make a bunch. And then they had about a 4-minute stretch where they weren't hitting anything in the first half, which allowed Kansas to kind of get back in the game. They get hot again to end the first half, and then continuing the second half. It was just kind of this ebb and flow of the 3-point shooting, while Kansas obviously took a much different approach, which was playing through the paint as well. But it ends up being a 5-point loss. Tons to break down here. But just initially, what was your overall reaction to this loss for KU?
Yeah, Texas Tech's a great team, Nick, and it's kind of funny. We had Isaac Trotter on our show before the season started from CBS, and I was actually talking with him this last week, and we were talking about teams in the Big 12 and how far they could go in the NCAA tournament. And Tech was a team that we had singled out even before this past weekend's game as a team that could go to the Final Four. They really understand who they are. They've got some matchup problems, which, to your point about them making threes, I thought as great as they were from deep, KU could do absolutely nothing with Toppin when he was on the court. And quite frankly, if Toppin didn't have foul trouble to where he only played 21, 22 minutes, whatever it wound up being, this could have been, a result that skewed even more Texas Tech's way, because Kansas just had no answer.
Which, by the way, just real quick, Toppin's been doing that to everybody.
Yes, yeah.
Games, he's been averaging 25 points. He's just been on an absolute tear. So it wasn't just a one game. I mean, he's been fantastic.
Oh, he's a terrific player, and he's a guy that I think kind of fits that spot where KU doesn't have a real great cover for him necessarily. A little too strong probably for Flory at this point, too quick for Hunter Dickinson, too tall and long to kind of have KJ on him and have that be the answer. And so, and credit to Tech, because the ball was moving really, really well. And so there were times when Toppin was getting the basket, but somebody else was making the play, and he was the guy that kind of finished things off because of a really good look from somebody else. But making 10 first half threes, the reason I brought up how good Tech is this wasn't a loss like the BYU loss, right? It wasn't a loss like the Utah loss where, you're just kind of played off the court, or it's against a bad team. Tech's a really good team, and Tech exploited a lot of Kansas's weaknesses in this one. Even so, I thought, and you and I mentioned real briefly before we came on the show, it reminded me a lot of the Houston game, in that the margin between you leaving that game and being super excited and being like, we are so back, and and like what actually happened, and everybody being really upset, was so razor thin. And against Houston, obviously, Kansas really was in pole position to win that thing. Kansas wasn't ever really in that spot against Texas Tech, but it was a situation where, you led inside of 10 minutes at one point. I think it was a tie game at 3 minutes or right around there. You're down 2, in the final minute or so. So it was a game that was winnable. And if you found a way to win that game, if you make the 1-3 that you needed to make, if you made that one extra play, then this is a very different show than it wound up being. And so the margin for error was so thin, and it feels like, and we talked about this after the Houston game, and I'm interested to get your thoughts on it, Nick. It feels like these are the games that Kansas always wins, that this year Kansas is not winning.
Absolutely. That was my big point as well, is, I'm sitting there, you touched on it. I'm sitting there, it's 73-73 with a minute 46 left in the game. And I've got this feeling in my stomach of like, boy, I don't know if Kansas is going to pull this out. And that just made me kind of sit back and think, okay, over the last 18 plus years or so, if it's a tie game with a minute 46 left, Kansas wins 99.9% of those games, right? It's like, oh, automatic W. Don't even have to worry about it. Tie game, 146 left, easy W. No problem. No questions asked. You just had this feeling, right? A feeling of invulnerability, this invincibility of Kansas at Allen Fieldhouse late in a game like that. And you mentioned it. This year, you've had really all 3 of your losses at Allen Fieldhouse in conference play. Look at them. It's a tie game against West Virginia with 15 seconds left. You have the chaos that happens at the end of that game where you end up losing. Against Houston, you're up 6 with 16 seconds left. You find a way to lose. And now in this game, it's a tie game. You're down 3 with a minute 30 left. You have 2 possessions really that you have a chance to set up to try to make a basket to either tie the game or put yourself in position to make it a 1-point game and then eventually maybe win the game. And it's just an absolute train wreck. It's tough to see. Allen Fieldhouse has lost its aura of invincibility. It's just not there anymore. And it's kind of one of those conversations where to me, I was thinking more about it, and it's like, is it a chicken or the egg situation, right? There's some conversations this year about the fans, about Allen Fieldhouse and the fans, and are they bringing enough? And then you look at the team and think, okay, well, they're struggling obviously late in games, and it's just so. I don't know where to go with it. I'll just say this: you look at the last two plays that Kansas had, the last two possessions Kansas had. One of them, your sixth-year veteran senior guard throws it into the third row inexplicably, with with just still like 20 seconds left on the shot clock, and then your other possession, you end up getting it to Zeke Mayo at the top of the key, who, with still plenty of time left, ends up forcing up an air ball three, trying to draw a foul. Like those are your last two possessions, right? And it's kind of unbelievable. And especially on the second one, I want to point out the second one. The second one was an inbound from the baseline. We praise Bill Self for being the greatest inbound from baseline, play guy of all time, really. And that's what ended up happening. So, and one other point I want to make here is, I think everyone, when you get to late game execution, and I think, Kevin, you know this, when it comes down to late game execution like that, it's really hard necessarily to just blame one thing or say, oh, this is exactly why you failed. I'll just say this. When you look at what DeJuan Harris did throwing it away, that's pretty hard to look at any other option besides that. And you look at Zeke Mayo. But coaching is an aspect of this as well. To me, late in games like that, when you've got a team that looks uncomfortable and sped up, that's a reflection of your coach. That means your coach is uncomfortable. When you got a team that's calm and cool and collected, that's a reflection of your coach being able to look in the huddle and say, I believe in you guys to make this happen. So I'm a little wary of that. I don't know what that means. It's hard to say. I think, for instance, with the DeJuan Harris play, I mean, whatever play Bill Self drew up, they didn't even get a chance to run it. So you can't say that Bill Self was, failed at that point, because they didn't even get a chance to execute whatever he possibly was trying to get them to run. But yeah, just an absolute train wreck. Obviously, it's something that we as Kansas fans are not used to seeing. I mean, you're talking about people like me that are in their 20s and 30s, have never experienced this level of Kansas basketball in a negative way, obviously. And so that's very frustrating. But yeah, the aura of invincibility at Allen Fieldhouse seems lost at this point. That's not to say that you can't recapture it, right? I mean, I don't know. But at least for this season, and really even going back to last season, you think about the BYU loss they had at Allen Fieldhouse too. I mean, even going back to last season, it's lost right now. And that's obviously very alarming.
Well, college teams suck at end of game possessions. Like there's not really a better way to put it than that. They're generally pretty terrible, and Kansas typically has not been, under Bill Self. And I think, how many times, Nick, have we been on the other side of it, where you've watched the game and Bill Self's team executes the last few possessions and winds up winning, and the other team like loses its mind, and Kansas fans are like, couldn't be us, to be that way. And to your point, yeah, I mean, I know Hunter said after the game, the throwaway was on him, that he should have come out, to that part. I tend to think of it just as a miscommunication one way or another. I don't know if it's on DeJuan. I don't know if it's on Hunter. They had a miscommunication, and it feels like Kansas doesn't typically have miscommunications in big moments like that. But you look at the struggles inbounding the ball against Houston. Your point about under the baseline stuff, Kansas got a wide open, sort of alley-oop for Rylan Griffin off the baseline earlier in the second half that Rylan didn't convert, but it was there. They got that kind of look, and in that situation, when you have those two possessions and the only shot you get from those two possessions is a prayer that's not even really thrown at the rim as much as it was just a guy hoping to get bailed out by a whistle, and doing it, to your point, so early in the shot clock when you had time to pull it out and actually get a shot. I think it was almost kind of staggering. And what makes it more staggering, to your point, is the fact that it's typically been different for Kansas in late game situations. That's something that this year's team has struggled with. And, you were talking about the way you felt even with a minute and a half, 2 minutes left to go, where you're like, well, I don't know if they can get across the finish line. It feels like 3-4 years ago, even with Kansas teams that weren't always perfect, that, a lot of times were struggled, and, maybe they played with their food a little bit too. So it was against somebody that, quite frankly, the result maybe should have been better. it still felt like you went into those final 2 minutes like, okay, it's a tie game at Allen Fieldhouse. Kansas is winning this game.
Yes. That's really the point that I want to underscore here is, yeah, that feeling is lost. That feeling is lost for the time being. And really, something that's probably not talked about enough is think about other teams, opponents coming into Allen Fieldhouse, right?
Yep.
I mean, you're coming into Allen Fieldhouse and you're scared out of your mind. I mean, Texas Tech had only won at Allen Fieldhouse one time prior to Saturday. One time.
Okay, hold on. I will cut you off though, because I'm pretty sure that happened in 18, and KU went to a Final Four. So maybe KU's playing the long game here.
I was actually at that game that they lost against Texas Tech. But yeah, that's the point. I mean, you see teams come in that have literally never won an Allen Fieldhouse or only won an Allen Fieldhouse like once, and they're not scared anymore. They're not scared anymore to come down Fieldhouse and try to win. That's another aspect of it. And I think more of it is with the transfer portal, teams have more experienced players. There's so many different layers of complexity to it. I think they go beyond that. But it kind of boils down to Kansas has not been the same, certainly this year or last year, and other teams are not scared to come down Fieldhouse.
So. Look at how, and I know we need to go to break, but look at Tech's offensive possession where they got the 3, and it was a relatively clean 3-point look. And to your point, it feels like teams usually lose their mind kind of in those situations, and instead Tech kind of worked it, got Kansas into some rotations where guys were in scramble drill a little bit, and they were able to get a relatively clean look at 3 that they made it and kind of put Kansas behind the 8 ball. And so, one team was able to execute on a key possession and get a look that was a really good look, and the other team wasn't. It's usually reversed, but in this case, the team that, didn't get those looks was Kansas.
One last thing I will say about the 3-point shooting before we do go to break here is Texas Tech ends up finishing the game 15 of 43 from 3, which that comes out to about 35%. You want to know what the NCAA average for 3-point shooting is? Just right around 35%.
Well, and Tech usually shoots 37. So, like, as crazy as it sounds, because obviously with Tech hitting the 10 threes early, you left the game feeling like, well, Tech just shot its mind out. And it's like, well, actually, Tech wound up shooting below its season percentile in the game. So, and
pretty much NCAA average.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's something that maybe won't fit some people's narratives, but if you look at the numbers, obviously that's kind of how it comes out to. So, speaking of that, you should head to homefieldapparel.com and shop Homefield Apparel. You can use the promo code PAYE24, 15% off your first order over at homefieldapparel.com. We got KU gear. If you've got somebody in your family that is a fan of another team, it's coming up for March Madness. You want to have some good gear to represent your team March Madness. If you've got somebody that has another team, you can shop there as well and get them something good. Over 130 schools over at homefieldapparel.com. I've got Youngstown State's not going to be in March Madness, but I've still got this sweet Youngstown State Penguin shirt that I thought was cool because Penguins, man, one of the cooler logos out there. So go to homefieldapparel.com, use promo code PAY24, 15% off your first order, and more Kansas basketball talk is coming up next.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. As a reminder, you can subscribe on audio, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. Leave a 5-star rating and review. You can also subscribe on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN for more great content as well. Mentioned it at the top of the show, but again, spring football starting for Kansas football, so there's going to be tons of opportunities to hear from coaches, players, and more. And you can find a lot of that stuff on our YouTube channel also throughout the rest of this spring. Let's talk a few positives here from the game, Kevin. 2 guys that I think are worthy of some praise here. First is KJ Adams, who played.
Yeah, he was terrific.
Maybe one of the best games of his career. He had a career high in rebounds with 13. He was 1 point away from setting a career high, I think, in points. He finished with 21 in this game for Kansas, 10 of 12 from the field. He was fantastic. Made so many incredible plays. Really was just making impact left and right. In-box score, and if you just turn on the film, you can see the impact he made as well. He had, again, certainly his best game of the season, I think, at this point, and maybe one of the best games of his career.
Yeah, Kansas actually wound up out rebounding Texas Tech, and that's that has been far from a given with the way Kansas has played lately. I think it's kind of it's great that he played like that. It was unfortunate that I think some of the way people took it is, well, why can't he be this guy all the time? But I think one of the parts that you feel like should be more translatable, and it hasn't been, is obviously it's been really widely panned that KJ Adams struggles to rebound. He just does not typically rebound at a high level. And not only did he rebound well against Texas Tech, like you said, career high 13 rebounds, but they were the types of rebounds he was getting, right? Like he was going up in crowds and coming down with it. These were not, occasionally you get a bunch of rebounds because the ball just bounces off at you, right? Like you're kind of in the general area and it's like, oh, that was a nice rebound to get. KJ worked for those 13 rebounds and really, scrapped it and fought and clawed and was the first to do 50-50 balls. And, when you look at the part that you hope can continue, because the season's not over yet, it's not necessarily the 21 points on 10 to 12 shooting. Of course, you're going to take that anytime you can get it. But I think the other part, Nick, is if he competes that way on the glass every game, and he's not always going to get 13 rebounds, but if he just battles that way on the glass and really makes it a thing where I'm going to make myself a force on the glass, then I do think that that's an element that this Kansas team has been missing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Hunter Dickinson generally gets tons of rebounds, but look, Kansas got out rebounded by Colorado, actually, especially on the offensive glass in the Colorado game. So I guess that's some silver lining is they were able to rebound the ball much better against Texas Tech. And, it's kind of funny. Texas Tech, of course, you have McMillan and Williams, two guys that didn't play in the previous game. They both come back in this one against Kansas and play really well also. But yeah, it's that was very positive. Was KJ Adams. Hunter Dickinson again had a pretty solid game overall for him as well. 18 points. He ended up going 6 from the line. Also, Kansas got the line more than they have really all season. 16 free throw attempts in the game, and Dickinson was a part of that. Along with KJ Adams, who did hit his one free throw also. But something else I wanted to mention here, setting that aside, is the guard play. We touched on it, I think, with the late game execution for Kansas with the struggles of DeJuan Harris and Zeke Mayo. But people always say guards win in March. And right now, I don't feel super confident that Kansas has any guard that I think is going to be able to step up and make big plays at this stage. I mean, how worried are you really? And we'll get into some more stuff with Zeke Mayo, what happened after the game and statement by himself. We'll talk about that too. But just strictly on the court, I mean, how worried are you at this point about some of the issues that Kansas has had with guard play, right? It just feels like DeJuan Harris at times still struggles. Zeke Mayo, obviously, we talked a lot about him. I mean, if that really wins in March, is that a major red flag for this Kansas team at this point?
The unfortunate thing for DeJuan is that DeJuan actually had a pretty solid game from a pass first point guard standpoint, right? Like heading into that possession where he threw it away, Nick, he had 7 assists and 0 turnovers. I mean, you'd take that any day of the week. The one turnover he had all game came at the worst possible moment. And obviously with DeJuan, he didn't take a single outside shot. Wound up, I think, shooting 3 for and then scoring 6 points. So not really an impact as a scorer. But from a passing the ball standpoint, from a setting people up standpoint, I'm sure, there was a clip during the game where they actually said, hey, all these baskets that Kansas has gotten here recently have come off of DeJuan Harris passes. And so that part was good. It's tough to win when DeJuan isn't giving you a little bit more from a scoring standpoint. I'm not saying he has to score 15 a game, but I do think there's a major gap between DeJuan scoring 6 and DeJuan scoring 10. It may not seem like a big gap, but I think it's there. And when you add to it now, Nick, that DeJuan actually outscored Zeke Mayo I mean, that's really a tough formula to find success with if you're Kansas. If DeJuan's scoring 6 and he's outscored Zeke Mayo, who we've talked about in terms of when you look at this team and you try to break down, okay, ideally, what's your scoring chart look like at the end of the game? Zeke is at the top or at number 2. He and Hunter Dickinson, you feel like. And then you feel like if he's playing well, maybe KJ could be number 3 or number 4 as a guy who's averaged, 12 and a half points per game before. Rylan Griffin's a guy that you think, hey, he could, kick in here. Maybe you get a few points off the bench here or there. But the point is that the formula for success from a backcourt standpoint, DeJuan can be a pass first guy if Zeke is scoring. If Zeke is not scoring, DeJuan can't just be, pass first, pass second type of guy. And that's how 2 rough games in a row for Zeke. It's such a small sample size. The road games thing obviously has been a real deal this year for Zeke. He's struggled on the road. This one was at Allen Fieldhouse, and this was maybe his worst game of the season, especially when you consider the circumstances, the fact that he shoots 1 for 7 from the floor, the fact that he had 5 turnovers, including a few really bad ones. You think about the one that he just dropped out of bounds when he got the ball, on the wing there fairly late in the game. That's really tough, and it's really difficult to win when Zeke isn't playing well. And so that would be my thing with it, Nick. I don't think that DeJuan played awfully or anything, but if you're pairing him with Zeke playing like that, that's when you needed to get more from DeJuan. That may be when you need DeJuan to have 13 or whatever, and he didn't. And so overall, when you're getting, I think, a combined 11 points from your 2 guard starters, that's going to make it really tough to win in March and really tough to beat good teams.
There is a Zeke Mayo sized hole in the offense. And it feels like it when he's playing at his peak, which we've seen at times this season, it fits perfectly, right? With him as your primary outside guy and Hunter Dickinson as the inside guy. But Zeke obviously has struggled. Now, you talked a lot about what he did on the floor and some of the struggles there. Off the floor, there's absolutely no excuse for some of the things that were said about him. He himself tweeted out some screenshots of people messaging him, and that's the ugly side of social media. Is it gives people an excuse to think that they can just say whatever they want to anybody. So absolutely, really repulsive things that were said. It forced Bill Self to put out a statement, which you don't hardly ever see. Travis Goff responded to it as well. So just don't be those people. I mean, Bill Self talked about it. The times that teams need fan support the most is when they're struggling, is when they are down in the dumps. That's when they need fan support the most. And DMing a guy or tweeting at a guy or saying this, that, or the other about, I mean, really, really bad things, honestly, like truly horrible things. It's just gross. It's beneath KU fans. I think Travis Scott mentioned it. Like those aren't true KU fans, and I would probably agree with that. Like, as frustrated as you can be, as disappointing maybe as the season has been to this point, none of that stuff deserves to be said, should be said, or even thought. And if you feel that way, I don't know how to help you. Like just take a step back and maybe look in the mirror, I think, on that one.
Yeah, the worst part about it is, I mean, Nick, that these people would be the same people that would be first in the autograph line if Zeke Mayo had scored 25 points. And I think, Bill Self talked about social media and kind of, not looking at the positive parts of it. Nick Saban calls it rat poison for a reason. And the reason, I think some of it is, Saban is like, don't get, too high on yourself or whatever. But I think the other part of it too is when you let people in from a social media standpoint where you say, hey, I'm going to pay attention to Bill from Topeka, who, is loving me up every time I have a big game. if you're giving him that sort of power over you, and then you have a bad game, and Bill from Topeka says some of the things that, people were saying the other day, how do you differentiate all of that? And by no means is Zeke to blame. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying one of the really great things about social media, and one of the cool things about social media, is it's allowed fans to be more connected with players than ever before. And that's an awesome thing for a lot of people. And we've seen so many really cool things. Nick, I know you're a Royals guy and everything, and follow along. I had a really good friend who lived out in Georgia. He used to live here, but he lives out in Georgia. He brought his daughter to a Royals game, I think a year or two ago, and Bobby Witt Jr. hit a home run or whatever, and he posted the clip to social media, just like, oh, this is awesome. He's her favorite player. She's really excited. And the Royals saw that. They basically set them up with Bobby Witt Jr., and he was able to send her some stuff. And just a really cool moment, right? In a way that you probably wouldn't have been able to attach to your heroes or your players, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever. That's the good side of it. The bad side of it is you have all these people that feel like because they have an ability to connect with these players that they can go the other way with it, and they can say those things. And Kansas basketball means a lot to so many people for so many different reasons. The worst part about it, I think, Nick, too, well, not the worst part, but one of the bad things about it is Zeke's a local kid, right? Like, he was a guy that's from Lawrence that grew up wanting to play at Kansas. He gets this opportunity, and some idiots on social media are helping to turn that dream into a nightmare. And even if this season doesn't turn out the way everybody hoped or whatever else, and there's still some time to decide how that goes, Zeke could still look back on this year with a lot of funness, just sort of, hey, I got a chance to play at Allen Fieldhouse. I got a chance to do all these different things. And you're taking that away from him and making it, so much worse. And so I think the fact that Bill Self responded and put out a statement, I mean, I think he had to, but I also think that indicates how serious it is, right? In terms of, you felt like you had to say, hey, this isn't cool. And Self, said, I believe in the statement, basically, when things go wrong, like, I'm the head of the program, like, you can come after me. This isn't a perfect team. We've talked about it. It's a flawed team. They can be frustrating at times. Supporting them as they're trying to work through those flaws and become the best team that they can be, even if you're frustrated, putting on that sort of positive face for them, I think, is a good thing. But more than that, just don't be a jerk and don't go the other way, and don't, you have no reason to send stuff to the players. You think Zeke doesn't know he played badly? Like, you don't think that it means a lot to him to struggle in a game against a top 10 team or whatever else? Like, he doesn't need to then go onto social media and see your comments and everything. So it's a frustrating situation all the way around. It's frustrating too because people are anonymous so much online. And so somebody who didn't even have, the balls to put their own name on it for the most part, it's, the whole thing is really frustrating, especially since, like we talked about, this is a game that Kansas was right that, like, one or two plays go different, you beat a top 10 team and everybody's in his inbox telling him how great he is. That was literally the gap there. And so I know I've talked for a while, but it is a really frustrating thing to see, players have to deal with that sort of stuff. And I'm not saying players are immune to criticism, but, telling a player to kill themselves, when they don't shoot a basketball well in a game, might need to go outside and touch some grass. Like that's ridiculous.
Yeah, look in the mirror and really, really think about that. Yeah, it's and unfortunately, I think the other aspect of this is with the advent of NIL. I think that's emboldened people to say, well, if you're getting paid, then you should be able to take anything, right? Any sort of criticism. And it's like that's just a ridiculous argument. I think. I mean, it's just silly.
We come on this show and we'll say things like, "Hey, that was a bad decision by this guy," or "Hey, that was an awful. This guy played bad defense. This guy missed a block. This guy missed a throw that was there." That's all valid criticism, right? But when you take it to something personal, and certainly take it to someplace really vulgar, the way it did with Zeke, like that's not okay at all, and it's a frustrating thing to see.
Yeah, the gap between, hey, that was a bad pass, and telling someone to go die is astronomical.
Yeah.
By the way, it's those are two very different things. So
Yeah.
Really good conversation there. Thanks for your input, Kevin. We are going to take one more short break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about where Kansas goes from here, because unfortunately, it's a quick turnaround for KU. So we'll get into that coming up next.
We appreciate you supporting KC Sports Network by listening to our podcast. You have helped us become the highest-ranked Chiefs podcast network in 2022 and 2023. And don't forget about our daily Substack newsletter, the best written analysis you can find on the Chiefs straight to your inbox every day. kcsn.substack.com.
This is the podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer with Kevin Flaherty. Some good conversation there about Kansas and sort of some of the negative aspects of it. KU now has a very quick turnaround. We're recording this on Sunday morning, and it's a big Monday game coming up for Kansas right off of this tough loss against Texas Tech. They're going to be taking on Houston. Houston, of course, is a top 5 team at this point, a virtual lock to be a 1 seed of the NCAA tournament. You're going to their house. Obviously, you had the game against Houston at Allen Fieldhouse that went so horribly wrong late for Kansas. I mean, Kevin, how do you hit the reset button after that? I mean, you think about some of the ugliness we talked about that kind of transpired after the game and what happened in the game for Kansas. Like, how do you pull together that team and get them ready to go play this Houston team on the road?
Yeah, I think sometimes some of that stuff can galvanize teams, and you can see, everybody sort of band together, and then, hey, it's us against the world. The issue is, we've talked about this at different points. You can play really well against Houston on Monday and still lose. Houston's a really good team, top 5 team, like you mentioned, may even be getting slept on as a top 2 or 3 team in college basketball. As weird as it sounds to say that they are, Nick, this is a team that since they joined the Big 12 last year, they haven't lost at home in regulation. They have 1 loss at home over the last 2 seasons, and it came in overtime to the Texas Tech team that Kansas just lost to. And so, unfortunately, this is a game where you can, quote-unquote, get right, play well, and Houston still wins because Houston's a great team. But I do think that we talked about it before even the Texas Tech game. I think the way you compete in this Houston game, more than beating Texas Tech at home, was kind of what I had circled for, hey, what's this team going to do? Do they have a chance to make the second weekend? Can they even stack a couple wins together? Because Saturday was against a good team at Allen Fieldhouse. Now you're going to a ridiculously hostile environment on the road, and it's a 2-day turnaround. And like you mentioned at the time we talked about it, what do you have in the NCAA tournament? You have that 2-day turnaround. And so if Kansas refocuses and comes out and plays really well, even if there's a loss in this game, I think I'll come out of it feeling a little bit better. Like, okay, this team has fixed some of the energy/competitiveness issues that they've had over the course of this season. And that's been our thing all along, right, Nick? Like, we haven't doubted the A game. We've said all along, hey, this KU team at its best can compete with just about anybody, can beat just about anybody. The issue is that they haven't always been at their best. You've had games like the Duke game or games like the Houston game for 39 and a half minutes. And then you have games like the Utah game where you were generally non-competitive. You had halves like you had against Missouri or against West Virginia where you really put yourself into a bad position. And so I'm really watching this Houston game with a lot of interest. And again, it's not even necessarily, hey, you have to go win at Houston, otherwise I'm out. It's more, okay, is this a game in the final minute? Is it something where Houston, cleans Kansas's clock by 20 points? And I think I think that's one of the things that I'm really going to be watching because it's such a good team, because it's on a 2-day turnaround, because you're having to refocus after such a tough, outing the previous one. If Kansas finds a way to close out this year with a strong showing at Houston and then finds a way to beat Arizona on Senior Day, I think there's actually a little bit of optimism heading into the postseason where you say, okay, you finished 4-1 over the last few games, with the lone loss being to a top 10 Texas Tech game. If you're even 3-2 and you have a top 10 loss to Texas Tech and you lose on the road at Houston, it's not necessarily the end of the world either. And so I do think that this isn't a team that I'm out on just yet, but this is a game against Houston that I think I have circled because I really want to see, just even more than the final result, what's KU look like? Is it a Kansas team that comes out and competes like a team at Houston's level, or is it a team that comes out, just gets run out of the gym, and you're basically like, well, thanks for going down to Houston, I guess.
Yeah, and if that does happen, what you outlined there, the possibility of Kansas just maybe getting run out of the gym, my concern then turns to how many times can you bounce back from that? I mean,
Yeah.
You lose, the BYU game, you've had other games like that this season. Like, how many times can you come back from basically games like that to where, is the locker room just shattered? Is the spirit just shattered, right? I mean, and look, after the game against BYU, you were able to have a chance to play against some teams more towards the bottom of the conference, Oklahoma State and Colorado. If your spirit gets shattered against Houston and then you come back home against Arizona, that's not Oklahoma State. No offense to Oklahoma State. It could spiral for you at that point. So that becomes my bigger concern is you lose a Texas Tech game. If you follow that up on a quick turnaround with a performance a la BYU and you get smoked, I mean, are you KO'd at that point? How do you get back up after that? That's my concern. And you hear different coaches talk about, hey, a quick turnaround after a loss is good for some teams or bad for some teams. We'll find out pretty quickly, I think, what kind of how it's going to impact this Kansas team, right? I mean, pretty early on, I think we'll probably know, just like we knew at the BYU game. I mean, against BYU, 90 seconds in, you pretty much knew how that thing was probably going to go.
Yeah.
After the Utah loss. Now you have this Texas Tech loss at home, and you're going to Houston. And Emmanuel Sharp is healthy, by the way. He's fully back. LJ Crier's coming off a 20-point game against Cincinnati. This is a Houston team that seems fully turned up and is probably going to be out for blood at this point when Kansas rolls into town.
Yeah, absolutely. Houston has an absolute killer instinct, and I think they have a real killer instinct at home. And so if there's blood in the water, this is a team that's going to go ahead and open you the rest of the way up, right? And so I think that's part of the reason this game is so fascinating to me, is because that was a tough loss against Texas Tech. It would not surprise me for Kansas to beat Arizona on Senior Day back at Allen Fieldhouse. Kansas has generally played pretty well at Allen Fieldhouse, even the games that they've lost, and with all the things that wouldn't surprise me at all. But
what's the streak of Senior Day wins at this point? It's like over 20, I think.
Roman Empire, pretty much. Yeah,
so that's on the line.
Yeah, yeah. And so like that part wouldn't surprise me, but I think the Houston game is going to be a lot more telling for me in terms of what we can expect from this team heading into the postseason. And, whether they really actually have things, back on track, relatively fixed, however you want to phrase it. I think the Houston game is going to tell us a lot from that standpoint in terms of the grit and the competitiveness. And I'll be honest with you, Nick, if they find a way to win this game, and then close out with Arizona, I think you do look at this like, okay, like maybe this is a new season where you lost a game to Texas Tech that you were there right at the very end, but it didn't turn out to be something super destructive. And I think that gives you some optimism heading into the Big 12 tournament.
Yeah, you find a way to win this game against Houston. Boy, I mean, at that point, you're feeling really good about your chances for your Kansas of putting something together down the stretch. But obviously, the vibes, what you would say, are not particularly high at the moment after the loss against Texas Tech. That actually, one other thing we talked about a couple weeks ago also is that led to some more tweets from former Kansas players as well. Devon Dotson and Frank Mason were a couple that I saw more talking about this, about Kansas and about this team and about, sort of the aura of Allen Fieldhouse. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, that just tells you right there, it's different at Kansas and
Yep.
it means more. And obviously people are incredibly passionate and emotions run high, even for former players as well. Looking back, it means more. But you got to find that balance of, not letting it go over the top, I think, in a negative way in some cases. One thing positively that was really special about this game was, if you're watching the broadcast, Scott Pollard was at Allen Fieldhouse, which was, if you're unfamiliar with that story, it is absolutely incredible. I think I'm pretty sure E60 is going to be has a story put out with him. If you're unfamiliar, there's a great piece in the Indianapolis Star that was written probably about a year ago, I think, that kind of documented a little bit more about his journey, but a truly incredible story with heart transplant and fighting to survive. And to see him back at Allen Fieldhouse was fantastic, absolutely incredible. In some cases, he would describe it as a medical miracle. A really, really cool story for him to be back, and glad to see that he got some of the ovation that he certainly deserves for his contributions to KU basketball.
Yeah. That was a terrific story, and always good not just to hear the story, but like you said, to see him out and about and everything was really nice. 70th anniversary too of Allen Fieldhouse, and a kind of a cool deal in that obviously this year you had the renovations kind of heading in, but it feels 70 years old from like a mystique standpoint, but it also doesn't feel run down, right? Like a lot of arenas don't make it anywhere near that long being a primary arena. You think about, how long before K-State walked away from Ahern, which was a similar era of Fieldhouse, and as, the place where K-State basketball was played. And Allen Fieldhouse, the way she's going, Nick, I think Kansas could continue playing there for
another 70 years.
Another 70 years. So that was pretty cool to see and everything too. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, Kansas, quick turnaround like we talked about, heading to Houston for Big Monday. We'll see how this team responds. We'll be talking about it. As I said, we'll also be talking plenty of KU football. Spring practice is starting up, so you'll hear plenty from Lance Leipold, from coordinators, different coaches, players, all that good stuff throughout the rest of the spring, with spring football underway for Kansas football. So really exciting time still, even with some of the struggles KU basketball has had. You're still heading into March Madness. You're going to be in the NCAA tournament. You're going to be more than likely a higher seed, not a top 4 seed like you're used to, but still a higher seed with a chance to maybe get something going. And then with KU football as well, getting started also. So we'll have all that here on the Pay Podcast and our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN, and on our audio platforms as well. So thanks so much to everyone that's tuned in, helped support us, got us to where we are, and hopefully we'll keep going. We'll keep this train rolling down the tracks. as well. Kevin, you got anything final thoughts here before we head out?
No. I think we pretty much ran the gamut on that episode. So,
Yeah.
Oh, real quick before we go,
Sure.
I'm not asking for a prediction. I'm just asking who would be your Jayhawk that you're watching against Houston. Like, not even necessarily like this is, but like who you are watching. Like, you're like, this is the person that I want to see in this one.
Yeah, I mean, I've said Zeke Mayo so many times for road games, and I want to say him again. And I think he probably is the guy to watch again, just to see if he responds. Hopefully, people rally around him a bit more, and he can showcase what he can do, because we know he's got that in him. So, yeah, in terms of the score prediction, I mean, I think you might feel a little more confident that Kansas is going to perform well in this game than I do. I don't. It's hard to really see it at this point, but I don't know. Maybe Houston's 75, Kansas 67. I guess maybe is what I would go with. Hopefully I'm wrong, obviously, but I don't know. We'll see. And an 8-point loss against Houston, if it's a close game late, again, like we talked about, may not even be a thing that you walk away from feeling really negative about. But we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. I think, with the way that Houston attacks in terms of the way that they double in the post, I think Hunter Dickinson's found a lot of success against them because he can see over the defense and he can pass. And I'm not saying Hunter Dickinson. I'm using that to say I'm interested to see KJ Adams miss the first one. And KJ Adams, coming off of a great game, obviously, he's, even before having that great game, he has been a lot more efficient lately, shooting well over, 60%. And so, maybe turning a corner a little bit there. I think he's going to have some opportunities on cuts and things like that, when they start the double and their scramble drill and all of those things. And so, Flory Badunga, I think, had 19 against Houston in the game at Allen Fieldhouse. I'm interested to see if, because he's playing off of Hunter Dickinson, if this is another, fairly big KJ game. I think he's going to have opportunities for it. And I do think too, Nick, if KJ, you want to see Zeke bounce back because of his importance and all of those things, and also because of the way this last game went. But I think too, if KJ has a big game here, you actually feel pretty confident about where he is specifically heading into the postseason. So KJ Adams would probably be my pick, because I think he is going to have opportunities in this one.
Yeah, and that is an excellent point about him not being in the first game against Houston. So that could be sort of a wild card maybe for Kansas in this one against the Cougars in Houston. So that'll be Monday night. Of course, we'll be talking about that, like I said, and we'll be talking about all things happening with KU on the football side as well. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Bay Podcast. Once again, thanks so much for listening. If you haven't subscribed already, you should do so either on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN or on our audio platforms wherever you listen. But until next time, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.